This is Michael Ayers. I'm here to talk in this particular video about something called the Carver Policy Governance Model. It's a way of putting organizations together in a way that makes good sense, starting at the top of the organization, the board. In terms of a nonprofit, it's the board of trustees or board of directors. In terms of a district of public education, it might be a school board, a board of education. In terms of a company like 3M, it's the board of directors. This is a policy, it's called the Carver Policy Governance Model. And one of the cool things about the video is that you can stop and start it and replay it and see if it makes sense the second time. And it still may not make sense, but at least we'll try. But the downside is that you can't stop me and ask questions, so it's kind of going to be difficult for me. But we'll see if we can make this work. I attended the background a little bit. I attended the Carver Policy Governance Seminar in Atlanta in March of 2001. I'm looking down my notes here. At that point I was serving as the board chair of Tasks Unlimited Incorporated. This is an organization we've talked about in class in terms of mission and vision and so forth. I was also working for 3M, and I went to my boss and said I'd like to go to this conference, and he said what's going to be the benefit to 3M, and I explained what I thought would be the benefit, and he said no, I don't think so, but I'll give you the days off if you want to pay your own way. So he gave me 3 days off. I paid for the airfare and hotel and conference costs, and it was really very cool. We'll talk more about that a little bit later as well. It was conducted by the Carvers, John Carver, the originator of the theory, the philosophy, the approach, and his wife Miriam Mayhew Carver. And there was a sort of a trade-off thing. Every 90 minutes or so, they would, different one would take over the leading of the seminar. 3 full days. Lots of notes that I took in addition to having read books before I went down there. And they were extremely confident about this thing, which is kind of annoying. People who are really confident can be kind of annoying. On the other hand, ultimately they were convincing. This is really the way to organize boards as governing bodies for large organizations. They started out with, as you saw perhaps in the John Carver video that you may have already looked at on YouTube. That's an interview with him and Larry Spears, who was at that point affiliated with the Servant Leadership Institute, the Robert K. Greenleaf Servant Leadership Institute. What Carver is looking at is some big questions, and the 2 big questions, and you have a handout you can be looking at as we go through this, which has got the same kind of stuff on it, is why do we have organizations in the first place, and then why do we have a governing board to handle the organization? These are like the big questions we want to look at. And so we have to have big answers. And the first big answer is the organization exists to accomplish its ends. What are we here to do? Carver uses the phrase ends, and he has a very specific meaning for them. Mission is very similar, but in a sense more condensed and more concise, and requires some expansion if we're going to actually work on metrics. So the organization exists to accomplish its ends, and the board exists to represent the will of the owners in how the organization achieves these ends at a very high level. Now, owner is kind of an odd word to use if we're talking about MnDOT or Eden Prairie School System, for instance. And if you're talking 3M, there are shareholders and they're the owners. And the board supposedly reports to the shareholders. In a school district, or for MnDOT or something like that, or for United Way or Tasks Unlimited, the owners are not the legal owners, they're in fact the moral owners. It is these people, the owners are the citizens of the community who give this organization special status in terms of supporting it with tax money or allowing it to be exempt from taxes. So I'm now looking at page number 5. Here we have the 4 policy domains that Carver outlines. And I'm going to draw them very quickly here so I can scribble on them later in a few minutes. There's this whole circle of things. The ones up in this corner are the ends policies. These are the executive limitation policies. These are the board CEO linkage policies. And these are the actual board governance policies. Now, we use the phrase CEO. What we mean by CEO is the chief administrator, whether it's a CEO, an executive director, a superintendent, a president, whatever. It's the chief executive officer. And if you've got only one employee, then that one employee is the CEO. And so this is defining the relationship between these people. These are primarily about the CEO, and these are primarily about the board chair. We'll talk more about them, obviously, as we move forward. I'm turning now to the next page, page 6. The philosophy of Carver policy governance is only about board governance policies, the highest level policies. And these are legitimately the work of the board. There are lots of operational policies. In a school district, you may have a drug policy, you may have a sexual harassment policy, you may have a bullying policy, you may have a physical security policy, you may have data privacy policies. Those are interesting policies. Many of them are required by law, and in some cases the law requires that the board approve them, but they're not board policies. They are policies which are about the operation of the organization, not the governance of the organization. For instance, when I was on the board chair of Family Networks, which dealt with kids with EBD, we got a grant from United Way. United Way said you have to have a finance and investment committee. We didn't have one. Carver Policy Governance says you should not have standing committees. The United Way said you have to have one, so we had to adjust the pureness of the theory with the reality of getting money from the United Way. We didn't particularly like it, but we figured out a way to make it work consistent with the theory of Carver Policy Governance. The next page. The language that we use in terms of these policies, some of it are prescriptive and some are proscriptive. The ends policies are prescribing what it is you're trying to accomplish. For instance, the agency exists so that homeless teenagers will secure safe housing and job skills. That's what you're prescribing. You're saying in advance what it is you want the organization to accomplish. At the same time, you are proscribing, with the executive limitations, you're proscribing what it is that the executive director cannot do to try and accomplish the ends. So it's not what he has to do, but what he can't do, which is necessarily a smaller thing. So you wouldn't want the board director, or the CEO, the executive director, the superintendent to come to the board and say, can I do this? Because the answer is automatically, unless we've told you you can't do it, well, of course you can. It's all pre-approved unless it has been proscribed, unless we've said you can't do it. And if you keep coming to us and asking for permission, perhaps we hired the wrong guy. We don't want you to come and ask for permission. There are 11 things you can't do. There are an infinite number, minus 11, of things that you can do. We're not going to list 11, infinity minus 11 things you can do. We're going to tell you what's not okay. This is a much simpler and much smaller set of things to try to define. I'm going to the next page. The ends of the organization. Again, some of these are quotes from that you're seeing in the slides are quotes from Carver's books. Here's one of the books, Reinventing Your Board. Here's another book. This is the more fundamental one of boards that make a difference. And he's got several others as well. So the ends of the organization are what the difference is it's trying to make in the world, and specifically the difference is answering the question of, well, if the organization went away, why would we put it back? Why does this organization here? Why should we bother to support it? What's its merit? And the answer is in terms of 3 elements. What difference are we trying to make? For whom and at what cost? What's the difference we're trying to make, and for whom and at what cost? So example, we'll see an example from Family Networks in just a couple of more pages here. A hypothetical example, looking at a specific school district whose initials are Eden Prairie. I don't know if they still do, because over the last couple of days I haven't been able to get at their website, interestingly. But their slogan, which I think they called a mission, was educating students for success in a diverse and changing world. Well, that's wonderful, but how do you know if you accomplish that? In terms of mission, as we talked about it needs to be something where you can figure out whether you've accomplished it. So if Eden Prairie were a Carver policy governance organization, they might keep that sort of on the back burner, but then they would have to specify, by educating, what we mean is this. So here's the ends policy, educating for success in a diverse and changing world, but by diverse we mean this and this, and by success we mean this and this, and by changing we mean this and this, and we also maybe have to add some more things. in terms of adding more policies to explain more carefully what it is that we're actually holding the superintendent accountable for, because that's what the board does, is hold the superintendent accountable for the performance of the organization. So in the case of slide number 9, educating means this, as we're talking about it. Success means this, as we're talking about it. Diverse means this, as we're talking about it. Going to the next page, this is the Family Networks page. The mission was to measurably improve the mental health and social emotional functioning of children, adolescents, and their families, developing their skills and helping them recognize their strengths and access resources for success in daily living. That's way too long to be a mission. As the board chair, I tried to condense it down to something more like families building strength in social emotional health, but others on the board were reluctant to go to something that was that brief, believing that bigger is better. So I wanted to get past the Drucker test, 6 words or less, but I wasn't able to prevail. But then I was just another board member, and excuse me, the board decided what the board decided. But in terms of the ends, there were 3 pieces. What's the difference we're trying to make? It's in their social emotional health of these troubled kids and their families. For whom, people in the 9-county metropolitan area, I think it was, and at what cost? Well, we can't be out of line with the competition. We can't work really well with one family for $1 million, and we can't work with 1 million families for $1 each. So what's the median we're looking for? And we concluded that because we are in a marketplace where there are other service providers doing the same kind of stuff, we need to make sure that we are competitive with them. So we're going to deal with our budget of X, we're going to deal with Y clients, because that seems to be what everybody else is doing. We'd like to be slightly cheaper than the others and slightly higher quality, because that puts us in a good marketing position to negotiate with Hennepin County or Dakota County, but it is what it is. So that's the ends policies. And the more you want to specify enough so that it's clear to this CEO, executive director, whoever it is, excuse me, just exactly what you're holding them accountable for at the end of the quarter, at the end of the semester, at the end of the year. Executive limitations policies are kind of interesting. If you look at page 11, the topmost policy is the superintendent shall not engage in activities which are unlawful, unethical, or imprudent. Seems pretty ordinary, doesn't it? In fact, every organization probably ought to have that as what's called the global limitation. Whether you're the head of the Red Cross or the Department of Defense or MnDOT or Eden Prairie School System, you don't want the superintendent doing things which are illegal, unethical, or imprudent. But what does that mean? So we might have a thing which says, we think it's imprudent to have, so this is the global limitation then, is the illegal, imprudent, unethical limitation. But we might say, oh, but we think it is imprudent to have cash reserves of less than 60 days. In case the check doesn't arrive from the state, you still have to meet payroll. So having less than 60 days of liquidity is imprudent. And if you need more stuff, then you add more policies. Well, what do we mean by illegal? Well, you have to abide by federal laws and by state laws, and also we are accredited by some agency, and so you can't do things which are going to jeopardize our accreditation. The kids have to earn credits which are accredited. So you can't do anything like that. That would be illegal, as we're using the term illegal. What about unethical? Well, you can't discriminate against staff or against students based on sexual orientation, race, gender, country of origin, religion, those kinds of things. That's just not ethical to do that. And it's also not ethical to hire your cousin to be the plowing contractor for the snow removal in the wintertime. And the idea here is that the more policies we add, as we keep adding policies, we're adding to this green part. And the more green we have, the less white we have. And the white space is where we have professional discretion. Everything that's in here is pre-approved. If I haven't told you can't do it, if it's not proscribed, it's automatically okay. So when I define these ends and I define these global limitations, I'm comfortable as a board with any prudent interpretation And if it turns out that something doesn't work out, I may have to refine these things. But when it comes to this part here, the white space, I'm comfortable with any prudent interpretation of what I've said. Now, if it turns out that someone does something which doesn't work, perhaps that person is imprudent or illegal or unethical, maybe I hired the wrong person, or maybe I just need to refine my policies, but we need to get that under control. You can see this is taking way longer than I was hoping it would take. Oh well. How do we, page 12, how do we go about evaluating progress, whether the person's making progress? Remember that the board has only got 3 jobs in an organization. The board defines the mission or ends, it hires someone to take care of it, and it monitors that person's performance. That's all the board is supposed to do. That's all the board is supposed to do. Define the mission, hire someone to take care of it, and monitor their performance. And if need be, remove them and replace them, or whatever. But that's the 3 big things. Well, what does it mean to monitor someone's performance? The Carver policy says what you need to do, is shown on page 13, is have a periodic monitoring report. Here's what the policy says. Prove to us that you abided by this policy. So you prove to us you didn't do anything that was unethical in terms of discrimination. Prove to us that you always had 60 days of liquidity, because we think that's a matter of prudence. Prove to us that we are still accredited and we are consistent with state and federal law. So we have a calendar each year that says how often are we going to monitor these things, and we have we have a performance monitoring report which the CEO, executive director, superintendent has to supply, saying, here's the policy, I say that I am in compliance and here's my evidence, and the board can accept it or not. And if the board determines that the person's out of compliance, then the next question is, so what are you going to do about that? What are the actions you're going to take to get back into compliance, and when is that going to be done by? Because you have to be in compliance with the policies. That's the nature of things. I'm going to stop the recording here, and because I think I have a limit on YouTube and how long the things can be when I upload them. So I'm going to stop now and start part 2 in just a couple seconds. Hold on.